Hello, hello. Welcome to Love Good Lane. My name is Matthew. Thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to talk about pans and dishes that we use mainly for baking is what we're going to be talking about today. Do you use glass? Do you use metal? Is it dark metal, shiny metal? Is it stoneware? Is it ceramic? We're going to talk about it all. I, and you might as well, have a lot of pans and a lot of different options. And the experts, quote unquote, the experts say to you should only do brownies in this type of pan or do this for a glass pan. But you know what? I love all of my pans and I like to use all of my pans. So we're going to talk about the ways to make it work. It's still going to be delicious. It's still going to turn out well, no matter what pan you use. But I think you need to know some information in order to make the right decisions and do the right thing. So let me show you some examples of what we've got going on. So obviously this is a shiny metal pan as opposed to a dark metal pan. This is a scone pan. And this is another example. It's a bundt pan of dark metal. And then a 8x8 version of the shiny metal. Now, did you know, I did not know this until somewhat recently, that most recipes, unless it's indicated in there that you should use a glass pan or a certain type of pan, most recipes are created for a shiny metal pan. And so if you're using something other than that, that's when you need to adjust. I didn't know that until somewhat recently, but it makes a lot of sense. As far as glassware, we've got our good old Pyrex. This is a Pyrex 13x9. This is vintage Pyrex. You can put it in the oven. It's also glassware, even though it may come in different colors. And then this is a Pampered Chef piece. It's a loaf pan, but this is stoneware. And not all stoneware is Pampered Chef. Here is a glazed stoneware. You can tell because usually the bottom is unglazed. A stone pie plate. And then here is an example of a ceramic pan. Now this is not an oven pan that you would do brownies, or this can't go in the oven because it has a plastic handle. But this is an example of a ceramic pan. I don't have any ovenware that's in ceramic. I only have this fry pan, but it's the same thing and same concepts apply. Ceramic is actually metal. Again, you can tell from the bottom. Now, not all ceramic pans show the metal on the bottom, but it's metal that's coated in ceramic. And we'll talk about its benefits and what you do for those as well in a second. So, and I have my cheat sheet here so that I remember to include all the things that I want to talk to you about. So all that to say, if you have pans that you love, like I do, oops, I just bumped the mic. If you have pans that you love like I do, I don't want to never bake brownies in a glass pan because the experts say that you shouldn't do that. I would rather adapt and use what I love because it's still going to turn out well. It's still going to be good. Having said that, let's take, for instance, a box brownie mix. You're going to make the brownies in a glass pan, and then maybe a couple weeks later, you're going to make brownies and you do it in a metal pan like this. Are they still going to be delicious? Are they still going to look pretty good in both? Yes, they will. But are they going to be your maximum best that you can produce if you make no adjustments and just follow the recipe on the box? No. So let's talk about some characteristics of each type of pan. I think that's going to give you a better idea as to why we're going to make those adjustments. So let's start with glass. I have our glass pan here. Glass pans, they heat up more slowly. It takes longer for them to heat up. And so that means that it's going to take a little longer to bake something in a glass pan than it would in your, let's call it, standard shiny metal pan. But some good things are that it really retains heat well. So when you take it out of the oven, it's going to stay warm and or hot a lot longer than it will in a metal pan. So if you're going to set this out on the table for people to eat from family style, or if it's going to be out on a buffet, then you would want to consider doing it in a pan like this, because it's going to stay warm longer. So glass pans are particularly excellent for things like casseroles, lasagna, fruit desserts like a cobbler and a crisp. It's going to be terrific in a glass pan. Now, something to note is it's just how they're made. Glass pans are going to have rounded edges. So if you're making some brownies in here, especially your corner pieces aren't going to be perfectly squared off. I personally don't mind that, but there are some things that I make where that's a consideration, and so then I'll switch to a metal pan. The ways that we can adjust for glass, well, for all of the pans that we're going to talk about, is you either decrease the oven temperature by about 25 degrees, or you can adjust the baking time to a little longer or a little less baking time. I personally have found, excuse me, that when baking items in glass, it's going to take a little bit longer because it takes the glass a little longer to heat up. It's going to take a little longer to bake. So you might need to add a few minutes bake time. That's my opinion. We'll talk more about the differences between them as we go along. Next up, excuse me, frog in my throat. Let's talk about metal. So here's a shiny metal pan. Here's another example. The metal, it heats up faster than a glass pan because metal is a great conductor of heat. Pans are great for browning and crisping. So like if you like the crispy edge on a brownie or bars, things like that, or if you need them to be nice and golden brown on the top, on the edges, this is going to give you that. You're not going to get that characteristic with a glass pan. The other thing is that most metal pans have these nice squared off corners and edges. So if you want nice and neat, even bars, or, sometimes when I'm making a lasagna in a glass pan, the lasagna noodles that I use on the edges, I will take those noodles and I will either snap off, or if I have pre-soaked them, which I did in a recent video, I'll trim off the corner with a knife so that it's rounded, so that it fits in the pan better. Otherwise, you either have to overlap them or do something to get them to fit in the rounded edge. But anyway, so that is our metal pan. Let's talk about the dark metal. So it's going to be same qualities for the dark as for the shiny metal, except because of this reflective, we'll call it a reflective quality with the dark metal, it absorbs heat more than the shiny metal. So your dark metal pan is going to get hotter. And so you're definitely going to need to adjust either your bake time or your temperature. I personally usually do a shorter bake time, but you could reduce the temperature and do that or a combination of both. You just have to kind of know, you have to test out your recipes. That's just really all there is to it. If you keep an eye on your items, no matter what pan they're in, it's going to turn out okay. And by that, I mean, if the original recipe calls for a 20-minute bake time and it's not specified which type of pan, that means the recipe was written for a shiny metal. I would start to check them around maybe 15 minutes, but definitely 17 or 18 minutes. I would start to check, take a peek, to see how your things are doing. Because I personally, if I have to choose, would much prefer my baked items a little bit underbaked rather than overbaked. I can't stand dry stuff, dry desserts especially. Okay, so, oh, but I was saying about the dark metal. So this is my scone pan. You know that I make scones all the time. And so in this pan, I know that my scones, they take exactly 12 minutes at 400 degrees. And they turn out just the way that I want. So, and I actually don't remember the original recipe, what it said. I have a feeling it was longer than that. This is my dark metal bundt pan. Same thing. Whenever I make a cake or anything in here, I know that it's going to take less time because of the dark metal. It gets hot, and so it's going to cook it faster, and I don't want it to be overdone. Another thing I wanted to mention about the glass pans, you do have to be careful with the glass pan changing temperatures because you can crack your pan easily if you're switching. Like, let's say you have your French toast casserole in the refrigerator because it had to set up and absorb overnight or what have you. I would not recommend you take your glass pan straight from the fridge and put it into the hot oven. Danger of cracking it. So while your oven's preheating, or even for a half an hour or a little longer, you want it to sit out at room temperature before you put it into the oven so you don't run that risk. Same thing with if you were making some food in advance, you wouldn't want to take this directly from the oven and put it into the fridge because you're going to have the same thing. And I will also say that because I've had this experience before, if you have taken something out of the oven, even if you've let it sit for a while, and this goes for whether it's a glass or metal, but definitely glass because it retains the temperature, the heat, a lot longer. Even if you've had it out of the oven for a while and you're going to go put it into the refrigerator because it's for tomorrow, or you're finished eating from it and you're storing your leftovers, I would put a hot pad, a little pot holder or something, even a folded up washcloth or a dish towel underneath, in between the shelf of the fridge and your pan, because your most refrigerator shelves are glass. And so you put that hot or warm, very warm pan directly on your fridge shelf, you could crack the shelf. I know from experience. So I always now put something in between there, and then it's fine. This is also the case for, I like to bake pies. When you make a custard pie or like a chocolate pie, anything like that, where you put the hot filling into the crust and then you have to put it in the fridge for it to set up. I always let it cool at least a little while, at least half an hour on the countertop, so that I'm not putting it into the fridge screaming hot. But then when I do, I always put something underneath that pie pan, so that you don't run the risk of causing a problem in your fridge. Okay, we talked about the metal and the glass and the dark metal. Let's talk about the stoneware. Now, stoneware is it's going to perform similarly to the glass. It takes a longer time to heat up, but it's also going to retain the heat a lot more. And let's see, I had shown you this one. Remember, the glazed is still stoneware, but it's just a little bit easier to lift things out of because of that glazy finish. And I like using my stoneware pieces and glazed pieces, but you're going to want to treat it similarly than you would to the glass. So you're either going to want to bake it a little bit longer or adjust your oven temperature accordingly. Let's talk about ceramic pans. So like I said, I only have this fry pan in ceramic, but they do have bakeware for the oven in ceramic. And it has some really great qualities. It holds the heat well. It'll keep your items moist. It's easy to get out of the pans because of this finish. But there are a few, and they do cook evenly. So your pan of brownies or a cake or whatnot is going to be pretty uniform throughout, which is nice. But there are some disadvantages. One is that this coating, the ceramic coating, no matter what kind of pan, brand, whatever, it's not going to last forever. It starts to deteriorate, and eventually, no matter how well you take care of it, eventually you're going to have to get rid of it and replace it. Just the nature of how that works. The other thing is, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, but any pan like this, you're going to want to use wood, plastic, silicone, a utensil like that. Even a knife for cutting. If you've made a cake or brownies or whatever it is, do not use a metal spatula, a metal knife, anything metal, because it's going to scratch that coating. Once it gets scratched, you're going to start to notice that it can rust. And once that starts to happen, it'll start to flake. The coating will flake off and you're going to have problems. So I have a silicone serrated knife that I use for baked items that I do in those types of pans. Even my scones, I will use the that silicone serrated knife so I don't scratch it up. So that's something to consider with those. So what do I do personally? I talked about adding bake time or decreasing bake time or changing your oven temperature. I don't often change the oven temperature, but I do watch the bake time. Now, there are different theories on this. I've researched what America's Test Kitchen says. I've researched what Food Network says, recipes.com. I've watched videos. Everybody has similar viewpoints, but also a little bit different. So I think it's up to you on how you want your baked goods to look, or the item that you're baking in the oven, how you want it to turn out, and what you're satisfied with. And I think you just have to try it a time or two to see what you like best. Because, like I said, I don't want to stop using my Pyrex. I love my Pyrex. At the same time, sometimes I want a sharp edge on something that I'm making. My maple walnut blondies, which we love, I just prefer those with a straight edge. So I don't make those in a glass pan, although I could. And now we would know what to do if we were to use the glass pan to make those. So I hope that's helpful. Again, it's not something that I ever talked about with my peeps when I was learning how to cook. And a lot of this, for the longest time, I didn't really put much thought to it. So hopefully this is helpful. And one thing I wanted to talk about before we end today's video is putting multiple things in the oven at a time. Yes, you can do it, but there are some things to consider. One is if you're going to put 2 pans of something in the oven at the same time, or multiple pans of something, you definitely don't want them to be too close together. You got to give at least a few inches in between if you can on all sides, because baking in the oven, it's all about airflow and circulation for that temperature. So if you can, give a few inches space in between on all sides. I would also recommend, if you can, depending on what pan size you're using. If you're using a couple of sheet pans, you're not going to be able to do this unless you have a really huge restaurant style oven. But if you can, I would offset the pans. So let's say this were a cake pan, or you had 2 of these, or one round and one square, whatever. And when you put them in the oven, I would not only give them some distance apart from each other, but I would also offset them a little bit this way. And then if you are baking them for approximately 20 minutes, then at the 10-minute mark, I would not only flip them around this way, but I would also flip them this way and offset them in the opposite direction, just so that you're ensuring they're going to be evenly cooked and you're getting that air circulation. The other thing is, different things give off, well, all things give off moisture and can create steam when they're baking in the oven. So if you're doing 2 different casseroles, even if you're reheating them in the oven, they're going to take a different amount of time, and one is going to affect the other because they're releasing moisture at different rates if they're different foods. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. And then the more you put into the oven, the more your oven has to work in order to maintain that temperature. And that means your element, whether it's gas, electric, whatever, it has to kick on more to maintain that temperature. So it's going to take possibly longer than you think if you've got multiple things in there, especially if they're different things. So those are just some things to keep in mind. And another option is if your oven has the convection setting, I would recommend using that, because convection means that it has the fan that continually circulates the air in there, and that's going to help when you have multiple things in the oven. All right, so I think that about does it. I hope that I gave you some useful information, or at least some things that you hadn't thought about before. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed chatting with me today about pans and baking. Subscribe if you haven't. It's free and it does help out my channel, which I appreciate. And I appreciate you being here. So thanks again. Until next time, we'll see you later.